Millionaire heard his employee singing to her baby, and something inside him awakened. The mansion was immersed in a thick silence, the kind that doesn't belong to the night, but to the souls that inhabit it. The clock showed 2:37 in the morning. Outside, rain hit the tempered glass windows with an irregular rhythm, as if trying to sneak inside and awaken something that had been sleeping for years. David couldn't sleep. The habit of insomnia wasn't new to him, but that night weighed differently. He walked barefoot down the long hallway of the West Wing, hands in the pockets of his robe, and his gaze lost in the shadows projected by the dim floor sensor lighting. Everything in that house was automated, except the loneliness. He was about to return to his study when he heard it. A soft melody, barely a whisper wrapped in tenderness, floated from the most forgotten part of the house. He stopped dead, blinked. That sound didn't belong to any playlist, nor to any virtual assistant. It was human, real, alive. David slowly turned toward the service wing. It was a corner he rarely traversed, a part of the building that existed without existing, destined for those who cleaned his world without touching his history. However, that night something was pulling him there, a primitive impulse, like the echo of a memory he didn't know he had. He approached with slow steps, making sure the wood didn't creak under his feet. The voice was a woman's. She was singing an old song, perhaps a lullaby, perhaps a prayer disguised as melody. There was sadness in her tone, but also a sweetness that raised goosebumps. The half-open door let warm yellow light escape. The room was humble, barely enough to sleep and breathe, but in that instant it seemed like another universe, a refuge, a secret cave made of silent love. Her hair fell like a dark river over her shoulders, and while caressing the child's forehead, she kept singing. She didn't notice his presence. She didn't look up. She just sang, for him, for herself, for no one else. And in David something broke. He didn't know what it was. Maybe a forgotten fiber from his childhood. Maybe his mother's face, blurred in memory. Maybe the need to feel something, anything, that had no price or logic. That voice pierced through the armor he had built over the years and left a crack. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and allowed himself to listen a little more. When he finally walked away, he did so with his heart beating strangely. It wasn't desire, it wasn't pity. It was something else, something he couldn't explain, but that was beginning to awaken. And without knowing why, he knew that this song wasn't the first time he had heard it. If a simple melody ever made you feel something you didn't know was broken, subscribe to not miss what follows. The sound of rain became louder as he closed the door behind him, as if the house was trying to remember that the world still existed outside. David climbed the stairs back to his room, but he was no longer the same man who had come down seeking insomnia. There was something in his chest, a silent discomfort, as if the melody he had heard continued beating inside his skin. It wasn't just a song, it was a mirror, a key, a buried whisper that now demanded to be heard. He sat on the edge of the bed, without turning on the lights. From the window, the sky opened in distant lightning that outlined the silhouette of the sea. He brought a hand to his face and left it there, covering his eyes. Why had that voice touched him so deeply? Why did he feel like he knew that song, as if it had been written for him? His childhood was a locked room. He remembered the cold more than faces, marble more than hugs. His mother, present only in photographs. His father, always elsewhere, even when he was 6 feet away. The years had turned him into a man who didn't ask, didn't show, didn't feel. What was necessary to survive in a world where power was worth more than emotions? But that voice seemed to have told him a story he didn't yet know. He got up, crossed the room, and opened a drawer he hadn't touched in a long time. Among old papers and forgotten keys, he found a small notebook with hard covers, covered by a thin layer of dust. It was a diary, one of the few memories he kept of his father. He had never read it. He didn't want to when he died. He felt he had already lost enough to want to understand more. But that night, something told him he should open it. He turned the pages without hurry. Firm masculine handwriting, notes about trips, meetings, ministers' names, figures, contracts, and suddenly, there it was. A different line, underlined with a trembling stroke. Sometimes I hear her sing, just like your mother. I always knew that melody had something that can't be bought. David froze. The ink seemed more recent than the rest of the diary. He read it again, once, twice, 3 times. His heart, which had always been an out-of-tune instrument, began to find a note, a frequency, a crack that asked to be traced with fingers. Had his father also heard that song, or was he talking about another woman? Or perhaps he was talking about his mother, and a story they never told him. The clock showed 3:10. In the distance somewhere in the house, the rain continued hitting the windows like an old friend who doesn't know how to leave. And while silence returned to occupy the hallways, David closed the notebook, feeling that for the first time in a long time, he wanted to know more. Not about business, not about power. He wanted to know about that woman who sang, about that song that opened invisible doors, and about himself, about the man who had learned to live asleep. What he still didn't know was that that voice was going to change everything. While the house slept, Elena remained awake, not by choice, but by habit. The months of motherhood had taught her to move without making noise, to exist without being seen, to calm crying before it awakened suspicions. She had learned to live in the margins, like a footnote to a story that didn't belong to her. The service room they had assigned her had barely the necessities: a narrow bed, a rickety dresser, a table lamp without a shade, and a borrowed crib. There slept her son, Ethan, a baby barely 6 months old who knew no other music than his mother's voice. He was a quiet child, with open eyes as if he already understood that life doesn't always give respite. Elena had sung to him that night, with a mixture of nostalgia and hope. It was a song her grandmother used to whisper to her when she herself was a child, in a country house lost among mountains, an ancient melody, one of those transmitted without sheet music, like an emotional legacy. She didn't know someone had heard her, and if she had known, she probably would have stopped singing. She had been working at the Winchester mansion for just over 4 months. The job posting didn't specify it was such an imposing residence. He discovered it upon arriving: glass walls, abstract art in the hallways, church silence, unwritten rules that no one explained. From the first day she understood that there, her role was to disappear. But she needed that job, not from ambition, but from survival. She had knocked on many doors before that one. Some didn't open, others closed roughly when they saw she had a child. The world doesn't always have room for a single mother who has no one to leave a baby with, until someone, unknowingly, gave her an opportunity. She was invisible to everyone. Until now, she knew nothing about David, beyond what was said in hushed voices in the kitchen, that he was young, that he inherited a fortune after his father's sudden death, that he never smiled, and that he didn't tolerate noise. That's why Elena was so careful to maintain silence. That's why she sang softly. That's why she had learned to walk like a sigh. But something changed in her that night, not because of what she felt, but because of what she couldn't explain. When she turned off the light, she felt the air had a different weight, as if the room, though small, now breathed differently, as if someone, somewhere in the hallway, had crossed her story without touching it. The next day she woke up before dawn, as always. She prepared the bottle, fed Ethan, left everything in order in the small bathroom she shared with another employee she almost never saw. Then, with the discretion of someone who knows she can't make mistakes, she went out to begin her cleaning shift in the south wing of the house. While polishing the marble of the staircase, she felt slow steps behind her. She didn't turn around. She had learned not to, but the sound didn't go away. It stopped, and then continued on its way. It wasn't one of the guards. It was him. She didn't know that in the following days, those steps would become frequent, nor did she know that the silence between them would begin to speak. That day, the first one, when David passed by her side without ignoring her, Elena noticed it, not because of a word, not because of a gesture, but because of the pause. That brief stopping of steps that didn't need to happen. That suspended moment in which two presences brush against each other without touching. And although he said nothing, although his eyes barely deviated toward her, Elena felt it something had changed. From then on, the encounters became routine, mute encounters. It's true, but increasingly evident. Where before there was indifference, now there was a kind of contained curiosity. David crossed the hallways when she was cleaning, stopped to observe paintings just when she passed by, asked for coffee at unusual hours, as if he needed to confirm that her voice hadn't been a mirage, but he didn't dare speak to her. And neither did she. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was dense, rich, full of something they still didn't know how to name, like a song that hasn't been composed yet, but that begins to beat in the air. Elena noticed his brief glances, his way of breathing differently when she entered a room, his clumsy attempt not to seem interested. And inside her, something was also beginning to move. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something ruer, more uncertain. The feeling that for the first time, someone was looking at her without wanting to possess her, without judging her, without reducing her to her role. The feeling of being seen not as a shadow, but as a person. One morning, while sweeping the main vestibule, David appeared with a cup of tea in his hand. He stopped in front of the window and remained there for long minutes, with his gaze lost in the garden. Elena had her back turned, but she knew he was there. She knew that he knew it too. When she finished, she turned to leave, and that's when it happened. The baby cried. From the small monitor she carried tied to her waist, Ethan's soft but urgent crying filled the air. Elena tensed. It was her worst fear that her son would interrupt the artificial calm of that house. She ran to her room, leaving the broom aside, and found the child restless, wet with skin warm from the heat of the blankets. She changed him and hugged him, murmuring the same song as always. She didn't know that on the other side of the door, he had followed her steps. David didn't understand why he did it. He didn't need to know about that woman. He didn't need to see her son, but something in his chest, a kind of emotional hunger, pushed him toward that corner. And there again, the song, briefer, more broken, as if fatigue and fear filtered it through her lips. But it was her, and it was enough. That night, he went up to his study, opened a folder of forgotten documents, and searched among the old papers for the sheet music he vaguely remembered from childhood. He found it, handwritten, with crossed-out parts, with trembling lines. "Song for a son I couldn't raise with my own hands, so he won't forget me." The lyrics were his mother's. David pressed his lips together. Something was dragging him toward a wound he had never wanted to look at. And at the center of that wound was Elena. Elena had promised herself not to trust again, not from pride, but from necessity. After everything she had lived through, the safest thing was to keep emotions under lock and key. She had learned to harden herself, not because she didn't want to love, but because loving had cost her too dearly. Her heart didn't close suddenly. It armored itself little by little, like a house that has been looted again and again. The first time she believed in someone, she was 17 years old. She was young, yes, but she was also sweet, open, curious, with that sparkle in her eyes that life hadn't yet extinguished. He was older, charismatic. He promised her protection, future, a better life. He offered her the world with sweet words, until one day he simply disappeared, leaving her with something more than a goodbye, a positive pregnancy test, an unanswered call, and a life that would change forever. Since then, Elena learned to walk alone, not to wait, not to wait, not to ask. She raised her son tooth and nail, with double cleaning shifts, with rejections in interviews upon learning she was a mother. She endured stares that judged, hands that tried to take advantage of her vulnerability, and doors that closed before fully opening. That's why, when she got that job at the mansion, she swore not to risk anything. No feelings, no bonds, just work. And yet, that man, the one who lived upstairs, was beginning to stir things she hadn't authorized. It was his way of looking without invading. His constant but silent presence, his respect. He didn't say much. In fact, he said almost nothing, but his way of stopping when she passed, of being quiet instead of imposing, of simply listening, made her think, what if they weren't all the same? The question scared her more than any certainty. One afternoon, while Elena was collecting dry leaves from the greenhouse, a hidden quiet space that seemed forgotten by everyone except her, David entered without announcing himself. He carried a folded piece of paper in his hand. Seeing her, he hesitated. She straightened up, surprised. Their eyes met for the first time with clear intention. "That song," he murmured, almost in a whisper. "My mother used to sing it to me." She didn't respond. "I thought it was made up," he continued, looking at her, "until I heard you." Silence. He extended the sheet. It was the sheet music, the notes written by hand. "Do you know it?" he asked. Elena looked down. It wasn't fear, it was something else, an internal alert that told her, "Don't cross this line, you've suffered enough." "It's an old song," she finally said. "My grandmother used to sing it. I don't know where it came from." And without saying more, she turned around and continued working. David didn't insist. He remained standing, alone with the sheet music in his hand, feeling that he had touched a door that didn't yet want to be opened. Because Elena's heart wasn't broken, it was armored, and he still didn't have the key. Have you ever had to build armor to survive love? Tell me in the comments. That night, David didn't come down for dinner. He let silence occupy the house, as so many times before, but this time it wasn't about habit, but about necessity. He remained locked in his study, surrounded by books he didn't read, art he didn't understand, and memories that didn't ask permission to return. The sheet music remained on his desk, next to an untouched glass of red wine. The trembling handwriting he had recognized as his mother's confronted him with a truth he had never wanted to accept. Maybe in that mansion of cold-stained glass and heavy inheritances, love once existed. Maybe even tenderness existed. But it was extinguished without leaving explanation. He reviewed the old diaries, the ones he never dared to read. The dust remained on his fingers like punishment for having taken so long. He found vague references to her, to the silences, to the nights when she sang so I wouldn't get lost. But never a name, never a declared feeling. Everything was dry phrases, notes hidden between balance sheets and appointments with ministers, until he found something more. A letter. It was at the bottom of a yellow folder, folded in 4 parts, with edges already worn. It wasn't signed. It only said, "For the day when you understand that not everything is inherited with money." He read it with a tight chest. It was a brief text, but loaded with regret. His father, a man who had been synonymous with coldness and distance, spoke for the first time from a vulnerable place. He spoke of music as the language of the soul, of what he never knew how to give his wife, of how the only way she found comfort was by singing. He said the song was her way of surviving, of not disappearing completely, and of a child. He doesn't understand yet, but when he sees me sing, he calms down, as if his soul remembered something his mind can't yet name. I sing to him so that one day if I'm gone, something inside him will guide him back to himself. David couldn't contain his emotion. He left the library, crossed the central hallway, and headed to the back of the property, to an area no one had visited for years. It was covered with weeds, with overgrown bushes and dry branches, but when he pushed them aside, he found a circular space, surrounded by stones and old rose bushes that still resisted. In the center, a small dry fountain, and to one side, a plaque almost erased by time. "Here I sang for you." David fell to his knees. He had spent his whole life seeking meaning in figures, recognition in titles, power in inheritance, without knowing that the only guide he needed had been there, in the form of melody since his childhood. That same guide that now resonated in Elena's voice. He returned home with his heart trembling. He climbed the stairs without looking at anyone, and when passing by the service room, he stopped for an instant. He heard the baby babbling. Then some steps, and finally, the song. There was no doubt left. It was the same one, and it was time for Elena to know everything. The main hall of the Winchester mansion was completely transformed that night. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like invented constellations. The tables were dressed in off-white, with floral centerpieces that breathed opulence. The orchestra rehearsed a classical repertoire, and guests began to arrive, wrapped in expensive perfumes and measured laughter. It was the annual Winchester Foundation Gala, the event that for decades had served to reaffirm the family's place at the top of the business and political world. Victoria walked among the guests like a queen in her court. Each smile was exact, each greeting calibrated. No detail was out of place, except one. David still hadn't come down, and Elena wasn't in the service area, because that night, nothing would be like before. At 9 o'clock sharp, when the official presenter went up on stage to announce the opening speech, all eyes turned toward the main staircase, and then it happened. David appeared. Dark suit, firm gaze, no smile, but he didn't come alone. Beside him, in a simple ivory-colored dress that seemed to embrace her with modesty, was Elena, and in her arms, sleeping, Ethan. The murmur was immediate. The air became thick. Some guests disguised their surprise, others didn't. There were whispers, uncomfortable movements, piercing looks. Victoria, from the front row, felt how the crystal of her world began to crack. David took the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he said with a clear voice. "This gala for years has been a showcase for our family, but this time, I want it to be something more. Absolute silence. I want this house for the first time to reflect who I truly am, not the son of a surname, not the heir to a fortune, but a man who has learned late, perhaps nice, that power without love is nothing more than emptiness wrapped in gold." The official gala camera captured Victoria pressing her lips together, clenching her fists, about to explode. "And that's why," he continued, looking at Elena, "tonight I want to introduce you to the woman who taught me to remember who I was, and to the child who taught me to breathe for the first time." There was a timid applause, then another, but also frozen, uncomfortable faces, as if they were witnessing an earthquake in a tuxedo. Victoria stood up from her seat. "David," she shouted, without a microphone, but with a tone that cut through the music. "Mom," he replied, without fear. "All my life I obeyed the rules. I learned to be quiet, to pretend, to be what you wanted. But this time I'm going to choose with my heart." Victoria advanced toward them. The hall held its breath. "Are you going to stain the Winchester name with this?" "It's not a stain, it's the only clean part I have left." The words hung in the air like a sentence, like a liberation. Elena looked down, not from shame, but from the emotion that burned her chest. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever put her name next to dignity. And in the middle of the scandal, little Ethan woke up and smiled. People began to applaud, this time with more force. Not everyone, but those who did it with soul, because they knew what it cost to defy an iron mother. They knew what it cost to love, in a world where everything is measured by power. David took Elena's hand, and together, in front of everyone, they came down from the stage. That night didn't end in the gala hall. It ended in the back garden, under the stars, among dim lights and the distant sound of musicians packing up their instruments. David and Elena walked in silence, with Ethan sleeping in her arms, as if the world finally let them breathe. They had crossed a line with no return. They didn't say it out loud. It wasn't necessary. In front of the dry fountain of his mother's old garden, David stopped. "This place was hers," he said, looking at the mossy stone and flowers that struggled to bloom among the abandonment. "She came here to sing, when she could no longer bear the silence of this house." Elena caressed the baby's forehead. "Now I understand why that melody always hurt me, as if it wasn't just mine." David looked at her. "It was never just yours, or just mine. It belonged to all of us who didn't have words to ask for love, and found music so we wouldn't disappear." She smiled, with a serene sadness, with a peace she had never felt. David sat on the edge of the fountain. He made a shy gesture, as if asking permission, and extended his arms toward Ethan. Elena, in a silent but enormous act, placed him in his hands. It was the first time he held him. The child settled without resistance, as if recognizing in that body something familiar, something warm, something that belonged to him. David looked at him with a mixture of tenderness and fear. His large hands seemed clumsy at first, but then adjusted to the small body, as if they had always been waiting for that instant. And then, without thinking, he began to sing. The same melody, the same voice he had heard 1,000 times, only now it was his. He didn't have a great voice, he had no technique. But what came from his throat was pure, it was vulnerable, it was real. Elena, a few steps away, brought her hand to her chest. It wasn't just the song, it was what it meant. It was the man who had stripped away his walls to embrace something he couldn't control. It was the child who finally dared to cry, but also to love. When he finished, David looked up. "Will you stay?" Elena didn't respond immediately. She took a step, then another, and finally sat beside him. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered. "But now I know that this place can be a home." He rested his forehead against hers. The baby, between them both, sighed as if understanding that, finally he was safe. And in that forgotten garden, the music was no longer a lament. It was a bridge, a language, an embrace that needed no explanation. Days passed, and the house, little by little, began to change its breathing. It wasn't immediate. There were no renovations or new furniture. It wasn't about an aesthetic change, but something much more subtle. The air stopped smelling of distance. The walls, which before returned the dry echo of silence, now resonated with light steps, with laughter from a child learning to walk, with songs that didn't come from invisible speakers, but from human throats. The service wing was no longer just a functional corner. It became a living space, with knitted blankets, children's drawings stuck to the wall, and a crib by the window that now opened every morning to let the sun in. David was never the same again. He was no longer the man of marble and figures. He was someone who allowed himself to touch, to ask, to make mistakes. Someone who had learned that love isn't demanded or conquered, it's cared for, listened to, honored. His relationship with Elena wasn't a fairy tale story, but a daily construction, with shared silences, with fears that looked each other in the face, with promises that weren't said, but were kept. Victoria didn't return to the house for a while. Not because she was expelled, but because she chose to take distance. Her wounded pride needed to heal. But one day, without warning, as always, she appeared in the garden with a bouquet of white lilies and an expression that didn't carry anger, but something very close to acceptance. She didn't say much. She just sat next to her grandson, who was playing on the grass, and sang him an old verse of that melody. Elena watched her from a distance, David too. And in that gesture, small, unexpected, full of history, the house closed a circle again. One ordinary noon, while Ethan slept under a thin sheet and wind entered through the open windows, Elena prepared tea in the main kitchen. David came from behind, hugged her by the waist, and rested his face on her shoulder. They didn't speak. It wasn't necessary. Love, when it's true, learns to speak without words. The song, the one that was once a whisper among tears, was now the soundtrack of a house that finally breathed. And if this story touched some hidden string in your soul, subscribe, because sometimes a single story can be the beginning of your own transformation.